Hello, my name is Hagot Bozwanyan, and this is my Anthropology 350 Environment, Technology, and Culture final project. My topic is on the effects of tourism, specifically ecotourism in the country of Iceland. The reason why I chose Iceland specifically is because I recently visited 3 weeks ago, where I was a part of an environmental work camp as well as a cultural awareness photo marathon work camp. These taught me a lot about the country and got me interested into learning more about the country since I was there for so long. Working in an environment where you're trying to make a change in a country really helps you understand some of the struggles of that country. And some of the struggles that I learned about were about the 2008 financial crisis that hit Iceland and how there are actually current strikes happening in Iceland because of the implications of that financial crisis. So, people are actually striking right now because the cost of living is so high and their salaries are so low. And the reason why is because the cost of land, energy, and water is really cheap, but then everything else is really expensive. And by everything else, I mean products such as food, electronics, everything. And this is because they actually get everything imported, which makes the cost of living a lot higher since they have no product that they make themselves that would make the cost of living cheaper. The biggest growing industry, which is also the third largest industry in the country, is tourism, which is after fishing and aluminum refining. And a lot of people are going to Iceland now because they're just realizing the beauty of it and how interesting of a country it is. According to Environment and Energy in Iceland, a comparative analysis of values and impacts, there are some facts that I thought were interesting about Iceland, and that was that Iceland is actually the largest oceanic island, which means it's the largest island that's not a continent, and it lies just south of the Arctic Circle and is Europe's most sparsely inhabited country with less than 3 inhabitants per kilometer. The inhabited regions, which is only 25% of the total area, are limited to the narrow coastal zones as well as the lowlands. And that's because half of the country is a high plateau with isolated mountains and ice caps. Glaciers and lava flows each cover about 10% of the country, and lakes and rivers cover about 6%. Iceland is actually one of the world's most volcanically active countries in the world, which is really interesting, in my opinion. Um, Now back on tourism. There are some arguments happening right now about tourism, the tourism industry in Iceland, and those are because of the development implications that are being argued about, that are about how there are locations that tourists want to visit, but there aren't many roads that are accessible as the main road, which are which is used for most of the excursions that they have now. But to give access to these other locations, there's a lot of nature that would have to be destroyed to make roads. And on top of just destroying nature, building these roads aren't safe because of the weather. It's just an extreme weather that is not really safe to work in, especially in a construction environment. And on top of that, even when these roads are going to be built, they're not going to be accessible for 4 months out of the year, maybe even more, because of the weather conditions. So it wouldn't be a really ideal situation because of this reason. Um, and on top of just building these roads, that means that more driving is going to happen, which means more CO2 emissions. And like it was stated in Measuring Countries' Environmental Sustainability Performance, a review and case study of Iceland, Iceland's CO2 emissions from road transportation have increased 55% in the period of 1990 and 2010, which is pretty insane. And Iceland has the fifth highest vehicular ownership per capita in the world. And these emissions are because of these cars per capita and how Icelanders tend to buy larger and less fuel efficient vehicles. And these factors, as well as a flourishing tourism industry and aging car fleet, have been responsible for a 100% increase in demand for oil used by Iceland cars in the periods of 1982 to 2010. There's actually another part of tourism that's taking over, and that's the fishing. And that's interesting since it's the first and third largest industries in Iceland right now. And like it was said in Marine Angling Tourism, or MAT for short, in Norway and Iceland, finding balance in management policy for sustainability, they talk about how one exception to the law which banned capture and release in Iceland, which was passed at the end of 2011, was because of the seriously threatened halibut stocks in Icelandic territorial waters. So now, if you catch a halibut and it still remains alive, you have to put it back. When before, catching and releasing was not allowed for halibut. And for any other fish, it's still not allowed. Um, this is just because they're being over caught by fishing farms, which tend to tourists. Um, and because of these fishing farms, there are actually a lot of conflicts happening between them and the government. And these fishing farms try to tend to tourists, but right now, like, they can't even help them with a lot of things. Like, tourists don't get experience of filleting their own fish, and they actually don't get to keep their own fish that they captured, and this is because of the strict laws that Iceland has. There's another argument that's going into tourism right now, actually, and it's not the ecological implications, but it's actually the cultural implications. And by that I mean the tourism industry is bringing in a lot of foreigners into Iceland, which is great, but these foreigners are actually falling in love with the country and moving there. And this could be a really good thing, but a lot of native Icelandic people are getting really worried